Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to San Francisco Public Library in this wonderful event with our local journalists for San Francisco Small Business Week. My name is Kelsey, and I'm a librarian from the Magazines and Newspaper Center on the 5th floor here at the main library. I am joined by my colleague Julianne Randolph from the SFPL Small Business Center, with whom I collaborated to bring you tonight's crossover event that fuses journalism and entrepreneurship. For all the news junkies out there, stay connected to the programs and resources of the Magazines and Newspaper Center by visiting our homepage at sfpl.org/magsnews. We offer programs centered on journalism, as well as tutorials and activities to maximize your use of the newspaper databases and e-collections offered by the library. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that we are on Ohlone land. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. As uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. I am thrilled that you're here for our panel, Behind the Byline, the State of Small Business in San Francisco. Before we continue on to the program, a few thank yous and announcements. Thank you to the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library for their support in making this program and many others happen at the library. Thank you to the library's media services team, Kenny in specific, for providing tech support and to ensure the smooth running of this program. And thank you to Owen Thomas from the San Francisco Business Times for his support making this happen. He's been with us from day one in constructing this blockbuster panel of local journalists. Without further ado, it's my honor to welcome Julianne Randolph, small business librarian and my dear collaborator. Julianne will introduce our panelists and kick off tonight's event before handing it over to Owen.
Good evening, everyone, and happy San Francisco Small Business Week. My name is Julianne Randolph, and I'm the small business librarian here at the San Francisco Public Library. We're so excited to welcome you tonight as part of this citywide celebration. Now in its 21st year, Small Business Week is led by the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce and honors the entrepreneurs and small business owners who make our city so vibrant and innovative. This year's theme is Rising Together, a powerful reminder that success doesn't happen in isolation. It takes collaboration, not just among business owners, but also among the organizations and community partners that support them. At the San Francisco Public Library, we're proud to be a part of that support system, not just this week, but all year round. Our Small Business Center is located on the 4th floor of the main library, and it's one of the city's best-kept secrets. Through the center, we offer skill-building workshops, one-on-one mentoring, small business spotlight events that elevate local entrepreneurs and their stories, and pop-up markets that help showcase their work. And now on to tonight's program. We're thrilled to present Behind the Byline, the state of small business in San Francisco. The panel brings together some of our city's most insightful local journalists who will share their raw and real takes on the state of entrepreneurship today. It is my honor to introduce our panelists. So we have James Salazar, neighborhoods reporter at the San Francisco Examiner, Junyao Yang, data reporter at Mission Local, Laura Waxmann, business reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, Kevin Nguyen, business reporter at the San Francisco Standard, and guiding our conversation as our moderator is Owen Thomas, the managing editor at the San Francisco Business Times. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Us here. I'm Owen Thomas. I'm as managing editor of the San Francisco Business Times. I cover a wide range of business, oversee our coverage really, and I'm thrilled to be here at the San Francisco Public Library. As as I told Kelsey and Julianne when they first approached me about moderating this event, I fell in love with the library really when I first moved to San Francisco. I am old enough, I should reveal, that I still think of it as the new library, even though this building opened just over 29 years ago. I remember the complaints, too, about how they were getting rid of the physical card catalogs. And as kind of a child of the early internet, I laughed at that because you can look this stuff up online. That's how I did it at University of Chicago. Get with the program, get with the future. If I've gotten any wiser in the intervening years, it's to recognize that the accumulation of knowledge is not about oppositions, paper versus digital, the internet versus books. It's really about how you learn to use new tools and old tools together. And the new will eventually become the old anyway. A decade or so after this library opened, I was running fact-checking at a monthly magazine here in San Francisco. Shout out to anyone who remembers Business 2.0. This library is probably one of the few places where you can find copies of that magazine and others from that era. I remember my surprise when one of my researchers told me she didn't have a library card. Now, to be fair, she had just moved here from Alabama, so we'll give her a break. But I slid my card over my desk to her. I slid my Muni FastPass over, too. I don't know what I was thinking, but, it was a very trusting boss. And I told her, okay, get on the Muni at Embarcadero, ride at 3 stops, just like I did today, to Civic Center. You'll pop out, you'll see a main library exit, go there, go up to, I believe it's the 4th floor for the Business Science and Technology desk, very close to the small business desk, and ask them anything you need to know. I don't remember the question that I sent her there to get answered, but I remember that the library had the answer, had the book that she was looking for. She was able to fact-check that passage, and she was amazed, and I don't think she ever forgot the library. In a day when the maker of ChatGPT freely hallucinates its way to a $300 billion valuation, the library remains a center, a purveyor of sense without sycophancy. And I'll admit that I had to Google how to pronounce that word. But the fact that this building has served the same purpose through dot-com boom and bust, and boom and bust after that, speak to the importance of permanence in a rapidly shifting world. Several publications I've worked for in this city have lost their archives to bit rot or bankruptcy. I sometimes joke that our newspapers and magazines, for those of us who still publish in paper and ink, they're just 3D printed websites, really. But thank goodness for the trees who gave their lives so we could really remember things. And thank goodness for this library, the San Francisco Public Library, for all libraries, for the active memory and a place for it. And with that, we can start our conversation. All right, so we're here at this library, this place of memory, to talk about the here and now, to talk about small businesses in San Francisco in 2025. An interesting moment, one in which I think we are reminded of the importance of small businesses. I think one thing we might start with is just how your beat kind of intersects with small business. One thing I noticed as we were kind of gathering a group is there's not really a reporter, who's covering small business purely as a beat. Kevin and Laura, you're both identified as business reporters. Junyao, you're a data reporter. James, your beat is neighborhoods. Small business touches all of those, but I thought we could throw to the panel and just start there with how small business enters your coverage in the day-to-day.
Well, I'm going to quote Kevin from behind the scenes, who just said, if you're a reporter in San Francisco, you report on small business. And I think that kind of sums it up, right? You really can't go through life in the city without touching a small business or participating. You can these days, but that's not why we're here. So I think, our reporting, especially mine and yours as well, real estate, we've really seen the impact that small businesses have on our downtown economy, They're the backbone. I think the pandemic really revealed that, and I've learned so much just from that coverage about how important small businesses are to making things run, to activating streets, to activating buildings, and to the landlords, we've found out.
Junyao, as a data reporter, do you find it's difficult to get really authoritative, comprehensive data about small businesses?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is hard to find a comprehensive data to really showcase how the businesses are doing in the city. You can go to individual businesses and ask how you're doing, what's your sales number. Sometimes they don't want to give it to you, and sometimes they have a rough number of things. But there's some data that the controller's office has about the sales data that we used to look at, I think, the businesses on Valencia Street after the central bike lane to see how they did after it was installed. And yeah, I think the sales data, that was the only thing that we can find that can tell kind of a picture of how that was back then. But I do want to say how I got into reporting on small businesses, because I remember I started at Mission Local about 2 years ago, and the first few assignments I got was just to write up some business openings and closings in the Mission. And I remember my editor was telling me, this is just a way for you to just get yourself out on the streets and to get to know this neighborhood and then write a few stories along the way. And that's how I started covering the Mission. And then I've just becoming really interested, and honestly, I love hearing business owners tell me how they started a business and what their stories are. How did you become a chef? Or how did you open this bike shop in the first place? And I've just kind of been hooked on that since then. Yeah, that's how I got into it.
Can I
Yes,
piggyback off that? I mean, just to both your guys' point, San Franciscans operate small businesses. Obviously our tax base is made up predominantly of these corporations that are more or less, soulless despite, their culture. But yeah, it's to work at a San Francisco paper, to write about these big corporations who have such a big say in what happens, to our office vacancy rates, to what housing gets built. You want to connect your stories to San Franciscans. Otherwise, because there's a world where Laura and I just write about deals all the time, and there's just 3 paragraphs. New York real estate firm does X.
We don't do that, Kevin.
No, we do, exactly. We don't. That's the point. I mean, we work at to serve our readers here. We got to connect it to San Francisco, and everything has a domino effect to small business, and especially in downtown, wherever we are now. It touches everything.
And James, as you're covering neighborhoods, how prominently do small businesses kind of loom in that picture of a neighborhood?
Well, for me, small businesses have been a very prominent part, especially as a neighborhoods reporter for the Examiner. I've kind of just gone into different neighborhoods, and I'll introduce myself to businesses, or just see what's going on in terms of developments, or how's foot traffic doing, things like that. And you come to realize that a lot of neighborhoods, with the reputation that they get, at least from the way I see it, they owe it to small businesses. I recently did a profile of business owners on Clement Street, and I found that a lot of people, they would say, oh, this neighborhood, before I lived in this part of town, I wanted to come here because my favorite restaurant was here, or my favorite boutique, my favorite dim sum shop. So all of these places, kind of, to me, are that first source of a community where they sort of set up shop, and then they build this base that attracts other people. And then through there, that's how you get these neighborhoods where you either want to live there or your friends want to come visit there. And I think that's kind of something that also my reporting's kind of illuminated for me, is that even though you might say oh, it's a cliche, or we put it on a stamp that small businesses matter and that they're the heart of the city, to me it really is true to a certain extent, because they're kind of that fabric of, through them we can then have that place to hang out, that place to shop or just unwind. And I feel like that environment just kind of bodes well for anyone involved in it.
It is something that feels uniquely San Franciscan, the strong sense of attachment to a neighborhood. I mean, every city has neighborhoods, right? But that the emotional resonance of like where you live and how it fits into your self-definition, James, it seems like that is what you're kind of seeing and documenting as a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it, and I've also, like had conversations with, especially like some restaurant owners. They'll say, "Oh yeah, my biggest challenge is we can be very neighborhood centric." So you're like, "Oh, why would I want to leave District 1 and go to the 10 other districts? I have everything I could possibly need here." So I think it's also, as much as like, yes, we do love our neighborhoods, it is, finding different ways to highlight aspects that people aren't seeing and, wanting them to be not necessarily motivated, but, encouraged or feel excited about, oh yeah, I don't frequent the southern part of town as much as, the central or this part, but now I want to because of this profile that I read or, this event that keeps happening in this part of town. So I feel like, yeah, while each neighborhood has their characteristics, when you put them all together, you just get this really like amazing little tapestry that gets woven.
And Junyao, you referenced openings and closings, and that is kind of almost the caricature of local small business coverage. It's like, oh well, you only care about us when we open or we close. I mean, and yet that's kind of in the life cycle of a business. That's like the birth and the death, right? These are dramatic moments, and we are kind of drawn as journalists to these dramatic moments. I thought I would use that as an occasion to maybe let us talk a little bit about our craft and like how we choose stories and, like why is it that we write about, say, this opening, the opening of this restaurant and not that one. What we do can feel very transparent in the sense that we publish in most of our cases every day we're putting stuff out there, and yet how that comes about can feel, I think, very a little opaque to the audience. So I thought we'd maybe take this opportunity to shed a little light on how we do what we do. Junyao, do you want to?
Yeah, just to start the discussion, I think honestly a lot of it is when I spend time walking the streets in the Mission and I see, oh my God, this place had a sign on it and says they're gonna close. And sometimes there are places that's only been around for like a really short time, but sometimes it's like a kind of an anchor to the neighborhood. I think, honestly, a lot of time it's just like as it comes up. Some stories might fall and we didn't notice that a place closed until a long time after they did. And yeah, it's always a shame that, like I always was like, oh my God, why would I didn't see that and until like a few months later or something like that. But yeah, I do think a lot of times the stores that we write about are those that are significant in the neighborhood. I remember I wrote about the closing of Fabric Outlet on Mission Street. It's been there for decades, and as I was like talking to the customers who were in there, I was the person to bring the bad news that this place is gonna close down, and they tell me about the like stories of how they made Halloween costumes for their kids when they're so little, and now their kids are starting to learn to sew costumes themselves from this place. And yeah, I think a lot of times we like emphasize on the businesses that really have deep roots in the neighborhood, and I think yeah, that's kind of how we do the small businesses, like to determine what to cover and what not to.
I have a little like a story I could share. So I was having lunch with my friend who owns like a restaurant here over in Civic Center, and she was just walking around like up and down the bar. She's like asking her staff. She's like, "Who pissed off Eater.com?" And we were like, "What? Why?" She was like, "Because they did this top 10 list of things to eat around, the Orpheum Theater or whatever, and they didn't mention us. And then they had another story about the top places to eat in Japantown, and they didn't mention us either. So like, what the hell did we do? Like, did we piss somebody off? And I told her, I was like, not necessarily. I think like sometimes on the outside looking in, people think like media, like we have a secret plan for everything, but really it's just, I told her, I was like, I just don't think like they knew about you. Like sometimes it just comes down to lack of exposure, and you can't control that, right? Like, if that reporter's not walking around the street like Junyao here, like, and they're just they're typing up a list from, Los Angeles or New York, wherever media is, like sometimes that just defines the list and you weren't on it. So I don't know if that touches your question at all, but like sometimes it's just like totally accidental, sometimes things just come to us, sometimes we get inspired by something, sometimes we are just tipped off by marking the event that, hey, this is the end of something after, in whatever era you want to put on it.
I'm glad you set the record straight, that there is no secret agenda, because we get that a lot. But I do think that sometimes it comes down to a business owner or a source's willingness to talk, right, and to share information and to be transparent on their part with what's happening. And sometimes that can decide whether you pursue a story or not. And we want to, if we're going to do a story, usually we want to go deep, or we want to have a little bit more information or insight into what happened. We want to have the facts, and sometimes not having that communication can be difficult. I see my role as a reporter to document change, document trends, and so that's kind of how I decide what gets covered. And sometimes the change is loud and it's in your face, and then sometimes it's behind the scenes and you learn about it later, as you said. But I think it just kind of depends on what's grabbing our attention in the moment and what's happening in the broader context, right, that we're reporting on.
It could be as simple as, the Instagram algorithm serves you up a post, and you see, oh, this chef just posted this very emotional farewell message,
Yep.
About how terrible it is to do business in Soma, and
Yeah.
Of course you're going to write about it.
I know who
because-
are you thinking of what I'm thinking? No, or yeah, sometimes the message is egregious, or someone
Yeah.
is very outspoken, and it makes you pay attention. right?
Or NBA All-Star Weekend comes, and Tyler Florence is nowhere to be found, even though we gave him a bunch of money to have his little shops at Union Square, right? When that
Are we
comes
going
up-
there right now?
Well, we're talking about how news comes up, right? And how do we decide what to cover, right? Sometimes it's just that simple. It's like Food Network star takes money from city, now bails on the city after the city gives him public. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is the magic of the follow-up, right? It's like you wrote about something, and how are they doing a year later? Like, they promised, oh, we're going to expand to like 5 locations, in our first year. Well, did
What
they?
happened?
Yeah.
That just brought something up for me. When I was starting out as a reporter, I remember I was at this journalism mixer, and I was talking to an editor, from Berkeley, and was just kind of like sitting with him and like asking for advice, right? And I think starting one of my first jobs and just being really nervous, and I asked him, how do you get daily coverage? Like, how do you get ideas, and how do you do that? And he was just like, you got to follow up. You got to do the follow-ups. You got to be on it, get the updates, and that's how you have the content. And then you start multiple stories, and you follow all of them, or most of them, and there you have lots of daily content to write about. So I always kind of remember that, and the follow-up is definitely magic.
Yeah, and sometimes that's just like set a 3 months reminder on your calendar to like follow up.
If you're
on
that
this.
organized.
I try to do that, but
What's your secret, James?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it is just, getting down to like the why of it all, not to get, like philosophical. But usually a lot of my stories will just kind of start out with, me noticing something, and then I'll talk it out with my coworkers, so that way I have some sort of reference on, no, actually you're just imagining things, nobody else is thinking that, or, oh yeah, I too had, a similar train of thought, so maybe there is something here. And so like for me, a lot of it is just like, a lot of times, even applying my own like personal interest to a certain extent, like I'm a fan of the WNBA, obviously super pumped about the Valkyries. And so that was an instance where I was like, oh, wait, if I'm excited about them coming next year, then, these other business owners around Chase Center must also be because of their own reasons. I wonder if that's the case. Let me talk to them and find out. And then, I got to have conversations with them, and then the reporting would either lead to, oh, yeah, we're excited because, we have like 20 more dates of people, and then others being like, oh, business is always just like steady for us throughout the year. There probably will just, be this consistency. And then it was through those conversations that, then people would get back to me and be like, oh, hey, James, did you know, like, this new restaurant is, like, coming to Thrive City? Or, oh, we're opening this outpost, like, near Mission Rock. And so it would kind of be like the gift that keeps on giving, in the sense that my one story would be, we're all just, really excited for the Valkyries to come to town. And then through that, there are, like, 5 to maybe, like, 6 other ideas that come out of that. Maybe not all at once, but it is, like, a little refreshing, to have someone reply back to you like 4 months later being like, hey, I remember you from this story you did. Let's talk about this now. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay, cool, connection. But yeah, usually just kind of trying to figure out why stuff's going on. That's usually like my launch pad.
I'm noticing the definite pattern here is getting out and talking to people, particularly in person. That seems critical when covering small business.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like any other source, really. We were just talking about trust back there, and I think that when people meet you and they, kind of get a sense for who you are and what you're trying to do and where you're taking the story, I think that helps create trust. And by being in person and showing up and showing people that you are paying attention, that makes them think of you.
Is it challenging in kind of this day and age and in the media environment, maybe even the anti-media environment that we find ourselves in? Do you find some small business owners are suspicious of journalists? Does that face-to-face contact help alleviate that? Do you find are there conspiracy theories around the media when you first encounter someone?
I feel like most of the time, the small businesses that I reach out to are excited to talk to me about their place. But I've noticed that a lot of times, because I cover some small businesses in the Sunset, in the Richmond too, and a lot of the shopkeepers there, they're Chinese Americans. They immigrated to the U.S. Later in life, and I do feel, even if I speak Mandarin, and I can communicate with them in Chinese, I think a lot of times there's some kind of, they don't trust the media that much, and I think they are not so sure why I would want to ask all these questions and want them to like go on about their stories. And it's the act of asking all these questions might seem like suspicious to them, and they're not so sure what like local news really do. I think a lot of times I spend a long time trying to explain what I'm trying to achieve here. Neighbors are excited that you're here, or we want to know how these tariffs impact you. I just want to figure this out and kind of walk them through it to like gain their trust. But then there's also, like you guys mentioned, I feel like the craft is like the art of showing up and hanging out in a space, and to let people know that you're serious about this and you do want to spend that time there and to try to hear what they have to say. I think that's kind of a way to really gain that trust for me. Yeah.
I definitely, to your point, I think that there is mistrust when people have had experiences with being misrepresented, right, or with having their information taken out of context, which happens. And so I think those are the ones where you really have to, prove that your intentions are something and you're going to stick to that. I think what's worked for me is just like telling people up front, I'm actually working on a story right now with 2 business owners that are facing displacement. And, we did a tour of the neighborhood, and another person joined us on the tour who was part of a merchants association. And he was really great. And I ended up, after I finished with the 2 business owners, continuing with the the president of the Merchants Association. And one of the business owners emailed me afterwards and was like, hey, I just want to make sure that we're staying focused on our issue and not this, you know. And in that moment, I have to be upfront, right, and just be like, well, this is the story that I'm thinking, and this is the story that I'm going to work on, and you're going to be portrayed in this way. This is part of this story, and this is how it's going to be published, you know. And I think just telling people upfront what your intentions are, what you're doing, is probably half the battle.
And being like concise about that
Yeah.
too, because sometimes, you know, I don't know. Like,
And things change. So that's the
right.
problem
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
but-
Because like, you know, we're writers, we have big ideas. Like we're not only there to like profile them.
We have
give them-
editors.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's like a mismatched expectations thing and navigating that.
But the
Yeah.
clearer you can be, the better.
James, have you encountered that kind of challenge of managing expectations, and how have you navigated it?
I'd say I've had my challenges in managing expectations in terms of like, you know, some people will be too trusting of the media with me because I've had like, you know, I've introduced myself to like coffee shop owners and then they'll be like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, well, I write in the San Francisco Examiner. And they're like, oh my God, that means I'm gonna like, you know, get a story and I can get like, you know, a photo in the paper and you can like, you know, do this promotion for my business. And I'm like, yeah, you know, if a story comes up where I can speak with you, I'd love to. So, and you never want to like, you know, come off as like being someone's like cheerleader, you know, like having the axe to grind. And so I've kind of had to like, you know, work on that. I love like having responsive people to work with, but at the same time, it's also being like, whoa, I think you're thinking like way too highly of me. Here's what I can accomplish, and you know, here's what I want to set out to do with my story. And then usually for me, like once I lay that out on the line, they're like, oh, okay, you've just like put the scale in perspective into focus for me. Then they're like, all right, now I see what you're trying to do. But then even then, you know, sometimes at the end of a story, I've had people be like, oh, can I give you a sandwich? Or can I give you like the free tote bag that we're about to give away to everyone tomorrow? And I'm like, oh, no, thank you. That's so sweet, but I don't need it. And they're like, oh, but you did such great work, and this was such good reporting. We have to repay. And I'm like, you can repay me, you know, by keeping in touch. We'll check back on the next follow-up. But yeah, just kind
Just
of,
eat
you know.
the sandwich.
I don't get sandwiches.
I always like take my editors out. I say like my editors would be so mad at me if I accept this sandwich.
I'll eat it later.
Always blame the editor.
The
I try
golden
to
rule.
like, you know, not threaten, but I'll tell them, oh, can I come back in like, you know, a week with hard-earned money to like pay for something? They're like, no. But yeah, it's just, you know, trying to not like bring them down to level with them and kind of be like, this is realistically like what I can do with 700 to 800 words. Here's how I think you fit into that. It's not going to be, you know, positive or negative. It'll be like whatever the reporting bears out, like that kind of thing.
And I think, you know, you just have to remember, too, that you're not always going to get it right. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be unhappy sources at the end of the process. And what I have learned to tell people, you know, or how to manage those situations is welcome feedback, right? And to all the business owners in the crowd or future sources or whatever, it's always helpful to reach out to the reporter, you know, especially if you have a grievance. Like, we don't hear thank you or we don't hear, you know, congratulations enough. But if you have a grievance, you should reach out. And you should kind of talk that through with the reporter. And if the reporter is a serious and good reporter, they'll listen to you and they'll want to improve. And I think that's the only way that we can get things right, you know, and feedback helps everyone involved.
I don't know about you guys, but like I've found like San Francisco to be a like quite media literate town. Like there's like, I don't know. So like I live in San Jose, and like it's where I was born and raised, and I wouldn't necessarily say the same down there, even though the Mercury News at its heyday was, you know, a great California paper. But yeah, it's a very media literate town, which is like helps when you're talking to sources, because they're not completely like flummoxed by the newspaper, like maybe say Gen Z or Gen Alpha are, in which they'll be like, you know, like, are you on Instagram or TikTok? So yeah, I mean there's some generation stuff that's creeping up, you know, millennials and some Gen Z are business owners now too, you know, and not all of them know what a newspaper is or care anymore.
That's
Yeah.
a really good point, that the way people communicate is changing.
Yeah.
we have to change too.
Is that, are you finding that people want to connect with you on, whether it's LinkedIn or TikTok, like, you know, they want to kind of have a social media connection with you after you write about them?
Yeah, I think that, you know, Twitter, you know, that, I know that's like old news now, but when that started coming, learning to handle that and check my inboxes and just like tweet at people was a thing, right? And now it's TikTok and other channels and mediums, and I think the more you know, the better off you are. I do have sources reaching out to me on social media a lot, so that is just like another layer to the job, right? Next, on top of emails, on top of conversations, on top of everything else.
Are there ever any expectations about kind of the business impact that being written about will have that are kind of tricky to manage? In other words, like, oh, I think this is going to be so good for my business, like, you know, and, you know, I think James and Junyao, you were kind of alluding to that, like, that's not the point of what you're doing. It might be an incidental effect. But how do you navigate that when they think like, oh, this is going to be good for me?
Okay, good question. You know, I think it's case by case, but you know, something that I just thought of when you were asking that question was, I had a while ago, I did a story about a business owner in one part of town who, you know, was an immigrant and really was like bootstrapping it and built a business from the ground up, and then a business owner in another part of town who came later, you know, appeared with the same name and kind of the same concept, and there was some accusations there. And I think when I wrote that story, I was trying to be really, really, really fair, because it's one of those things where people point at each other and you don't really know what happened, right? You can just present the facts. And at the end of it, both business owners were not happy with me, and I felt that was a kind of a win, you know. And they weren't offended because I didn't get anything wrong in this case, but you know, I think they both weren't like doing cartwheels, but I was being fair, you know, and I think I did. That's the public service part of it, where you're informing the public, you're laying out the facts, and it's not about pleasing one or the other. It's about telling the story in a way that represents both sides.
Yeah, I mean, corporations have armies of PR professionals because of this, because what they say has a direct impact on, you know, their earnings. But small business owners don't. So, yeah, I mean, I second everything Laura said, but I just said, you know, to your point, Owen, I mean, like, these are people's livelihoods often at stake. It's very personal to them. So to navigate that, I mean, I just take it seriously, you know, and, you know, everything James talked about, like having to manage expectations, that's tough. That's the part they don't teach you in J school. But yeah, I mean, I just take it very seriously, because, yeah, for these people, it is life or death. That's why they think this might be like their one shot to get marketing. So, yeah, just being aware of that so you don't get caught off guard.
I do think, like, sometimes it is about like telling the sources that this is not a promotion piece for the business. But I think sometimes I do like think, I accept that my story would be a good way to promoting a business. And because of that, I think I try to be intentional about the businesses that I try to highlight. There are small businesses who have more resources than others, or they have received more media attention already than others. But some, they might never had any reporters coming up to them to like ask how this business came about, how they were doing. I remember there was a point last year or the year before, I did a story about a comic book store on Mission Street, Mission Comics, and they would just send us an email telling us that they were struggling, and we wrote a piece about how they were struggling. And then after that, of course, there are like people in the mission or around the city who were like, oh, I didn't even realize that they were having a hard time. And after the story, they know that, and they would try to make an effort to go there, go to the store. And that's something that will come out of this. And I think that's fine. And I kind of love that sometimes. So yeah, I think it is just kind of weighing, like, you know that you have this voice or you have a platform to help some businesses to get their names out, and I think that's fine too.
Talking about the struggles of businesses, there are certainly global forces at work now that are affecting businesses of all sizes. There are a set of problems that are uniquely San Franciscan or feel like it. At the Business Times, we did a cover story, and I think it was last fall, about how to open a bakery in 63 easy steps. Now, this was a story that I literally stumbled across because it was half a block from my house. I couldn't help but notice this bakery. It was called Butter and Crumble in North Beach. They had a big Instagram following, but the owner, Sophie Smith, wanted to open up a physical bakery, and she took over a former cooking school that had been vacant for years, basically the whole pandemic, because as you can imagine, learning how to cook in person was not something that you could really do for many years there. But she ended up having to, I think, rebuild her entrance 3 times because of kind of confusing direction she got from the city. That's just one entrepreneur's story. But it seems like red tape, bureaucracy, high costs in general, that's a theme of kind of life as a small business owner in San Francisco. Does that resonate with what you're hearing in your coverage?
I do feel like there's a lot of times I write about a business opening before they even open, and they say, we're aiming to open this spring. And then they would ended up opening in the fall or the next spring. And because of all the permits and like all the license you need to get and all the like ADA things and like all these requirements, that's something that I've observed that have come up a lot in opening a new business in the city.
Yeah, I think that that also comes back to your resources and how savvy you are, how much time you have, how much support you have. And I think there are businesses that don't have support, or maybe they have language barriers, or need a little bit of extra help to navigate these very complex systems that are in place. And others have attorneys, or they have people doing it for them, or they have, it's just like the differences, right, between your network and what you have, like what you're able to accomplish on your own versus getting help.
Yeah, I'm going to say something unpopular. San Francisco's low-key a corrupt town, so I mean that's look.
Hey,
if you're in the small,
But only low-key.
If you're in the small, when I say like low-key, like it's not very explicit all the time, right? Of course, we've had very notable cases like in DBI and Public Works, but I'm just talking about like, look, this is just the history of San Francisco. If you go back every era, whether it was the mobs being the police or whatever, San Francisco's got this strain in it. And look, I'm not naming names, but like, in like let's say the restaurant, food and beverage industry, there are people in this like world who are known as expediters. If you have the right relationships, like Laura said, if you have enough resources, you can get your alcohol or liquor license pretty quick if enough people are motivated to get your thing done. So I'm not defending it. I'm just saying like it's something we got to reckon with too in the city.
And then that is a good point. And then there are also cases where people might have the resources and they still hit hurdles that are super unexpected, and it totally derails them, even though they are. Like I'm thinking of a story actually I did for the Business Times when I worked there. It was a developer, a local small developer who was building single-family homes in Potrero Hill, and it was like a row, and he carved out a hill and did this like really amazing project with beautiful views. I checked it out, and he built the homes and couldn't sell them because of a fire hydrant. So basically, what happened, if I remember correctly, there wasn't enough water pressure on the hill. The fire hydrant is supposed to be 500 feet from this development, and it wasn't. But somebody stamped off his project, and he went all the way through the entitlement process and got it approved. And then by the time he had to sell, or he wanted to sell, the fire department was like, wait, this isn't up to code. And it became this whole thing where there were multiple different departments involved, and it's not usually just, that is, I think, where hiccups happen too, the communication between all the departments that have to vet these plans. For example, when you're talking about development. And I've seen that a couple of times now where people get really derailed and they have a successful business and they are pros.
James, did you have a thought on the permit challenges?
Yeah, I think it's like really beneficial, yeah, just to everybody's point, to like humanize these problems and these issues that people are having. Like, I know, for example, over at the Examiner, we'll have like our City Hall reporter will put out a story saying, oh, Mayor Daniel Lurie wants to expedite and streamline, the permitting process. And then somebody else will end up having a story on, oh, there was this small business owner in Chinatown who, wanted to modify 4 awnings and needed to get permits for like each and every single one of them. Here's how that played out. And I always feel like stories like those are like, good. Like, it's bad that these things are happening, but it's good because, we're not all like plugged into, the behind the scenes of what goes on into getting something up and running. So I think when you're able to kind of like take that step back and say, oh, okay, hey, here's the problem that's at hand. Here's one way it's like affecting somebody. Then, you kind of open up that discussion of, oh, okay, well, now how are we going to fix this? Or, to your guys' point about following up, checking in like 3 months later to be like, did that bakery ever open like in the spring? And then that could be, your next potential launch pad for like finding out why. So yeah, I always feel like, yeah, the problems are like complex and, it's not always the most like alluring and captivating stuff to focus on. But when you can find people, like to your point, how you said, in your neighborhood, like people whose lives are affected by this and, you can really like illustrate that, then I think that's when more people can, start wrapping their head around whatever the topic at hand is, because I know that's like what works for me personally.
And sorry, Maria.
Go ahead.
I think just one thing that we do as journalists, we kind of focus on the problems a lot, and sometimes it's also good to take a step back and report on things that are working. And I just want to highlight a story that my colleague, J.K. Deneen, recently did about an escape room that's opening up in the Mission. And the woman who is the business owner who's put her life savings into this business told him that she went to DBI, the Department of Building Inspection, 80 times in 6 months. And the reaction from the community was, oh my God, are you okay? Are you gonna close before you opened? And she was like, no, I actually enjoyed it, and I chose to do this because I like to be proactive, and this is what I needed to get through the process, and I found really helpful people on the other end. And I think we don't hear those stories a lot, rightly so, usually, but they do happen, right? And every experience is different.
Yeah, and I feel like, to your point, it is kind of not sad, but like frustrating fact that sometimes the plain like City Hall reports of something just passed don't get the attention from the public, but then when you find a person who was impacted by it, and then you have a story about it, and then that's where the attention comes in, and then those attention would work to like hold the City Hall accountable in a way, like to show that how they really impacted this person. And then that's sometimes how the like actions or like the city start to think about how do we fix this. I think it is sadly just how things works in a way. I don't
Something
really,
has to kind of fall apart.
it has
so
to
that
go
you can-
wrong,
yeah.
terribly wrong, for the city to
Terribly
do
wrong.
to do something. So, yeah.
It is kind of funny to see how our work does resonate through the corridors of City Hall. I remember noticing Mayor Lurie referred at some point to 63 steps to open a bakery, and I was like, oh, I think I've heard that before. I think I know. He didn't cite us by name, but that's okay. But it's like that's where he got that line. It's still very early in the Lurie administration, to be fair, but with the emphasis on like expediting permits, also getting a working group of departments to like talk to each other, is it just far too early to say if that's bearing any fruit? Does any of that feel promising to to the businesses that you're talking to?
The corporations feel heard. They were the first in line, so
Yeah.
they got his ear first. And by all accounts, he is, you know, I mean, he says this on the campaign trail. He's like, San Francisco is open for business, you know, every time, right? So that's the line they're trying to put out there, the mayor's office. So that's trickling out, and people are trying to get an audience with him to, you know, make their voices heard. So yeah, I mean, he's touted his big business connections. So those are the people who he met with first, and now it's kind of like slowly percolating out. So yeah, it is super early. I mean, it's only been like what, 3-4 months, 5. We're in May. Gosh.
Yeah, I think that you know, to business interests, whether it's corporations or small business community, right? For those who have felt ignored in the past or haven't had their voices heard or haven't gotten what they needed, I think it's refreshing to have somebody say, you know, we're going to work with you and we're going to fix this and we're going to make this happen. And you know, we'll see how that translates on the streets. We'll see, you know, who gets the resources, if it's spread out, right? If everyone is getting the same attention, I think that's kind of our job to figure out. But yeah, I think, you know, from the business community, what I've heard, there's a lot of excitement, and I think that partly comes because the pandemic really, you know, messed with people, and really forced a lot of businesses into closure and upended a lot of livelihoods, and so I think. We're coming out of that, and I think that people want to be optimistic and they want to have hope.
I think that there is a lot of talk from the current administration about the revitalizing downtown and things like that. But I remember my coworker Kelly Waldron did a story about how the goal of revitalizing downtown San Francisco kind of contradicts with how Muni funding has been cut a lot, but having a public transit system that works to bring people from the outer Richmond to downtown San Francisco, from the Sunset to downtown, is kind of an essential part of revitalizing downtown, but from people that we talk to, we haven't seen much action from the current administration to like do something about the Muni cuts and the budget deficit that it's facing. And I think we are still going to see a lot of impact of how the cutting bus lines and things like that would have an impact on the recovery of downtown San Francisco.
And, you know, I think we made the point earlier, Kevin, you might have said this, that downtown's recovery is about small business. Like, ultimately, the reason why you care about whether there are, you know, 100 or 1,000 people on this floor of a high-rise is because those 1,000 people take the elevator down and they buy salads at the corner deli. They drop their dry cleaning off at the local store. Is that the return to office does seem to be picking up some momentum? When does that kind of trickle down or flow out to small businesses? Again, is it too early, or are there signs that that's happening as people kind of theorized it would?
I think that's a great question. You know, I think there's a general there's so much in my head right now, but you know, what you said earlier about resources going into downtown and downtown recovery has been the focus, but the neighborhood small business are also important, right? And I think there's a little bit of a debate of where the funding is going and whether it should be also, funneled into other areas. Sorry, your question one more time.
No, is the
yes.
the return to office, which is kind of the underpinning the recovery of downtown. Is that scenario that like more workers downtown mean more foot traffic, mean more revenue for small businesses?
Yeah, I think that before we didn't have to think so much about revenue and all that because it was natural, right? Like we had a full downtown. I remember I used to work in the mall for a newspaper. We were the Examiner. We were located in there.
Westfield.
And we were in the Westfield, and I remember just like going out of the office, and there were people everywhere, and going to the street corners, there were people everywhere. And I'm sure we had the same issues with permitting and all these problems that we still have, but people, were making money or surviving because the people were downtown and they were frequenting these shops and they were going into the stores. And now we don't have that, and it kind of makes us examine everything. And I think the city is doing a lot to activate, and they are really trying, and they say it themselves, we're throwing things to see what sticks and to see what works, and part of it is experimental, right? But I do think that loss of foot traffic that we have, particularly in downtown, also goes to other areas, but particularly in downtown is the biggest challenge for these businesses. And without that, we have to figure out other ways to support them.
Yeah, the answer is just simply yes. It's directly tied to revenues. You have less foot traffic, you have less revenue, you compound that with higher costs. That's what small businesses have been staring down the barrel at for the last 5 years. It's hard to believe we're like halfway through this decade now. So that's why you see a bunch get washed out too. Even beloved restaurants that have a Michelin star. Like one just announced today, the one that uses the open flame. They just announced they're shutting down for 3 years too. So it's not just the mom and pop, I don't even know, convenience store. It's it's just literally just hitting everybody. We cannot underscore what a tsunami event the pandemic was. Just 2 years of operating in the red. It's it'll take most people out.
It's our museums, it's our cultural institutions, it's all of it.
And the flip side is, I feel like we'll see a headline about this big company mandates a 5-day-a-week return to office, and people think, oh well, that's great, that's going to boost foot traffic, and then this company lays off 300 employees, and my next thought is, well, that's dragging it back down again. There is, real talk on Wall Street of a recession. Junyao, you referred to tariffs already being something on the mind of small businesses, small business owners you talk to. What's the economic climate like out there, and what are you hearing about kind of fears, cautious optimism? What's the mood?
I think we can all agree that things are looking bad with all the tariffs and everything. I remember just these past few days, there's that talk about tariffs on film, foreign film. They're gonna impose a 100% tariff on foreign film. I don't think we know how that's gonna work out yet, but that is going to influence a lot of the film. I guess that those are not businesses, nonprofits in the city who show foreign films. And I remember I did a story about how in Richmond there's all these houseware stores on Clement Street that sell the cheapest baskets, I don't know, chopstick holders, and a lot of the cheap stuff. And they are imported from countries all over Asia, a lot of them imported from China. And at that time, the Trump administration was talking about, I think, 54% tariffs on Chinese imports, and now I think it's 100-something%. And that is definitely, I've been talking to the owners of those houseware stores. They're we order a bunch of stuff just now, so we didn't know how that's going to hit us. But when we order another batch in 2 months, that's definitely going to show on our prices, and that's going to pass on to all the customers. And I think that's a very vivid example of how the national stuff is going to impacting our local businesses in a way that's also going to trickle down to every single one of us.
Yeah, not to center Clement Street too much, but when I was talking to business owners there was a florist who I spoke with, and obviously I like struggled with bringing up the question because I'm like, oh, we've been having, such a good discussion. Now let me be like, hey, what's your economic outlook looking like if these things come to pass? And the florist that I talked to, he was like, oh, thankfully, I wouldn't be too impacted because, I source my flowers locally from like this farm over here and then that one over there. And then I remember I profiled the owner of Fabrics on Clement Street, and she was talking about like, oh yeah, unfortunately, when Fabric Outlet and the Mission shut down, that was sad, but we inherited a lot of their dead stock, so now we don't really have to, worry about like, oh, where are we getting our supply, because that also is coming locally. So I feel like I don't want to like, get into my crystal ball or like try to predict the future, but I think, especially in like regard to San Francisco, you'd see a case of haves and have-nots, so like, or maybe more so, oh, these owners are being impacted directly by these economic policies because this is where they get their goods from, and that's just, the nature of the business because nobody else can like provide the materials and supplies that they're looking for. And then you're also going to see the camp of, oh, these other workers have their businesses, sourced within the city or the Bay Area county limits. So then, yeah, I feel like that's just you're gonna kind of see like a break in, oh, here's where things aren't looking so hot for people, and here's where things, aren't great for others, but they're not like too terrible.
Could I grab the RTO question
absolutely.
real quick? So I think like whenever the mayor or like I don't know, real estate types talk about this, they're like, oh, if everyone just came back to work 5 days a week, San Francisco would be crushing it again. And like in theory, that sounds true, right? But like, James, we were talking about this backstage too. It's like, but how does that return? What does that return look like, even if we wanted to? So I mean, I'll just use very like simple examples for people. It's like San Francisco has a vacant office problem because big tech pulled back, like en masse. That's just the truth. So in 5 years, whenever it is, whenever they decide to come back in office 5 days a week, they're not coming back to the same real estate anymore. Many of them have shedded office space. Like Facebook famously gave up a whole skyscraper that was brand new that they didn't need, right? So that's being subleased out. So even past this presidency, when San Francisco's on that road to recovery, to filling that vacancy hole again, it's not going to be the same people who left. Is something I would just keep in mind.
I also feel like one thing that, well, maybe not gets like lost in the discussion, or maybe, people might not focus on is like, especially to me, like the aspect of affordability, because I'm like, living isn't cheap, and, I sometimes, think, oh, what if I was like that office worker who, yeah, I'm going into the office 5 days a week, but, I don't have that disposable income to like get the salad or, go buy my favorite deli sandwich. So then it's like, you feel like a sitting duck almost, because you're like, yeah, I'm in the neighborhood, but I'm not actively contributing, in the way that people want me to, because I'm a little hamstrung for cash. And then that just, yeah, kind of always makes me think like, oh, affordability goes back to the root of this, because it's like, you can simplify the permitting process, you can lease as much property to as many people as you want, but at the end of the day, if people don't have like money to spend, then what good does any of it do,
There was an interesting anecdote that just came out of, kind of today's report from one of our reporters who listened to Clorox's earnings. Clorox's CEO says that people are spending less on bleach because they're worried that they're going to have to pay $2,000 for an iPhone, which it's like, I'm not quite sure from a germ theory perspective that's the best household budgeting, but it does feel real. I also, like conversely, I wonder, are we putting too much on these poor office workers? Like, if you buy a mixed salad every day of the week, like what is happening to your household budget? Like,
I think one thing that we have to remember when we talk about work from home and return to office, the pandemic accelerated trends that were already in motion. And I think everybody kind of agrees on that, right? We were already heading that way. And the pandemic just made us adopt some of these models way faster than maybe we were ready to. but it was going that way. The same with online shopping, and that has affected, I sent you a story from my Mission Local days, where I did a story on the corridor, and the vintage owner who ran the business single-handedly, didn't have any employees, was being displaced because everyone was online shopping, right? And the next business that came in was a Reformation, or like a clothing store too, that had a lot more wherewithal. And so I think, those trends were already in motion, and maybe we ignored them, or maybe we didn't pay attention, or maybe we're too late to the game, but now it's here, and we have to face it, and it's not going back. It's only going up. We have AI companies coming in and innovating the heck out of our city, and I think this is not going away. So we need to address the problem at hand and have a forward-looking view versus what was.
Have you guys been to that Sam Altman thing in Union Square? That little creepy thing where they scan your eyes?
Oh, the world iris scanner that's supposed to prove that you're human? I mean, it's activating Union Square retail, so I guess, that...
Activation's doing a lot of work in that sentence.
I do think there's another way of like making, I guess it's not the only way, but like a complementary way of like making a kind of a destination. Like I was thinking about Stonestown, because I do make it a destination to go there because I want to go to Uniqlo, or I want to just spend a day at the mall where there are things to do, and I go to Daysol, or I have a good, nice lunch, well, not cheap, but good lunch there. And like, I just feel so confused why Westfield is so sad, but then Stonestown is so popping. Maybe we have to rely on these Asian brands to like bring people back to the malls.
I've thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
And when you go to other malls, we're veering off a little bit, sorry.
No,
But when you go
it's
to
all
like
good.
outside of the city to other malls, they're happening, and there's life, and there's families and all that. And I think the one thing that I have noticed is, a lot of these malls are in like the suburbs, right? Surrounded by housing, surrounded by kind of like that type of life.
Critical mass, they call it in like
Yeah,
real estate.
and people, that's what they do on the weekend. They go to the mall and with their children, and they hang out, and they get dinner. And I think the downtown mall that we have in San Francisco is just very different, And
It's a big real estate question too,
Yeah.
which is for another panel.
we'll save it. But the point is, to your point of placemaking and experiencing, and I think we can all agree that that's kind of where it's going. People who leave their house to go shopping want some type of experience. They want safety. They want all these things, right? And I think one of the things that's happening in Union Square right now is the city is recognizing that, and they're redesigning the Union Square Plaza with for children. And that is something that I thought was really interesting, because when we talk about tourism and we talk about travel, we have all these hotels around Union Square. Yes, there are a lot of business travelers, they're down now. So now we're relying on leisure travelers, we're relying on families. But if there's nothing you're offering them in downtown, how are they going to stay there? If they have kids and they want to go shopping and there's no playground, like where are the kids going to be? And so I think that's something that the city is trying to wrap its hands around right now. And we've just relied on foot traffic, and we've relied on business booming, and it's different now.
If I could tell you the number of times I've helped a family get a stroller down the stairs of the F Market streetcar.
Oh my God.
It's just like the city is not exactly family friendly in a lot of ways, and yet there are a lot of families that really want to experience it. And and I talk to these people. They're having a great time. Their kids love it. It's
And your question was, are we unfairly relying on the office workers? And maybe we are, and maybe we do need to make the city a place where families can be downtown and participate and afford things, and and I think that's kind of where we're at.
If I can wrap it up, because I think we do want to have some time for questions. What I'm really hearing is that the future of small business is in diverse experiences, in diverse audiences, thinking of the new rather than just trying to hold on to the old. And
I agree.
I think that really captures.
Easier said than done.
Yes, very true. Well, I think we do want to kick it to the audience for questions, so we have a little time. And
Yeah, so we have microphones. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll come over to the microphone so that you can speak it for everyone to hear.
Hi. Uh, Really great to have this panel, and I'm so glad to be here. And unfortunate there are so many people are missing out. But there are so many things which you touched and evoked. For example, this discussion of the businesses which gone, like many of them gone, and out of 100 stories like this, you're probably touching one. So, one of the things which we do as part of our, one of my portfolio startups actually is trying to capture and, in a sense also present in a different light or kind of new way this to preserve the history and culture, because the context which we're missing, like I'm a resident of San Francisco for 20 plus years, and I've seen how it went from really, like you mentioned, it's soulless now, in a sense, right? So how it's been rich, diverse, and like how we going into like point of singularity. And so the question I have, how the small businesses, which are really backbone and which been driving a lot of diversity, richness of the city, uniqueness of this city, can partner with people like you, like on the PR and on, news, and who can work together in a partnership to expand and kind of develop, grow the businesses, which nowadays small businesses don't have many partners, I would say.
I think it's a great question. If I can kind of set the table for it, the first thing is to kind of know the language and culture of reporters. I think that I hope I speak for the panel when I say the word partner is a major nails on chalkboard term to us. We don't view ourselves, we view ourselves as, counterparts. We view ourselves as kind of citizens in the same city, but we don't view ourselves as in partnership with anyone we write about, because that would be crossing an ethical line. So maybe it's just the wrong word, but to answer the question very directly, I would not think of a media outlet as a partner. There are many other support systems that could be properly thought of as partners. I don't know. Is that maybe that's a little too strongly put, but yeah. How do you think of that as what's the proper way to frame the relationship between the media and the businesses, especially small businesses that we cover?
Yeah, I think that you said it well, and I think there is a difference between PR and news journalism. But I think I said earlier, my job is to document, and I kind of see myself as an observer, right, who relays information and tries to get at all sides of the story. Not always possible, but you try. And I think that's the extent of it, right? And what our service is to provide information, to highlight an issue, to draw the city's attention to a problem, to potentially connect business owners who are reading one person's story and feel like they want to reach out because they're going through the same thing. Or, inform you about the resources that are available to you because the city is making a change to permitting processes, or they're opening the Office of Small Business, or they're giving you a loan, a free loan for the first year that you come into downtown. Those are the kind of things that we can do to help, but that's providing information, right? And that's in the business that we're in.
So the information could be, could very well be helpful. That's not, the intent is not to help a particular business, but maybe all similarly situated businesses to be kind of fair and equitable and open. But I'm also hearing that one thing that is very useful is an open door if you provide information to reporters, that can only help tell your story. If you don't respond to that email, if you don't respond to that phone call, if you kind of clam up and don't share when a reporter comes knocking on your door, it's hard to expect that a story will come out of that. So I think that's, just having some openness to engaging with reporters is like a real key.
Maybe that's the partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel the same because, like Laura mentioned earlier, when someone don't want to talk to you, I remember there are times when I really want to, like I found out a place is opening, I really want to get the stories out because I don't want to get scooped. And then I reach out to the owner, but he picked up, but he just doesn't want to share a lot of information about it. I think sometimes business owners want to wait until things are kind of in shape or like perfect and then talk to the reporter about it. And then it just ended up being a story of this place opening and without much information other than that. I think that's what we both don't want for the story to be.
We're probably veering off the question, sorry, but I think a misconception, right, is that I think, people, and I try to put myself in the source's shoes that I'm interviewing, and when you do that, you kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. But, people want to control the message. And the thing, when you work with a reporter, you can influence it, and you can be transparent, and you can tell your side, but you don't control the story, right? That's our job. And I think that is the misconception that often leads to frustrations as well, where it's like, I'm doing my job, and you're invited to be a part of it.
I think we have another question.
Hi there. I really appreciated the flow of the conversation, taking us from kind of the past and the history of small business in San Francisco to the major impact of the pandemic, and then having a very real discussion on today's economic climate. If we were to shift our gaze a little bit more forward-looking, a couple of years ahead, what are some of the things that you were observing, the stories that you were seeing, the changes that you were noticing that give you more excitement about small business in San Francisco?
That despite all of the dysfunction and heartache that I have, went through, that people still want to be here, man. So like, I'll just give a shout out. Like, if you guys go downstairs in the San Francisco Center Mall, a Pakistani couple opened up a restaurant because their food truck business was so successful. And it's a beautiful story, and they want to be in San Francisco. They commute from Richmond to be here, it's because I don't know, something about this place. I hate getting squishy like that, but it's true. It's San Francisco, right? So that gives me hope. People still want to be here despite everything I've just laid out.
That place is really good. Yeah. I also feel excited that I've seen a lot of businesses in this kind of bad economic situation are trying to experiment with new ways to use their space. And I know there's this place, this Chinese American food restaurant in the Richmond called Mama Hu Hu, and they have this Mahjong Monday event where it's typically a slow day for restaurants on Mondays, but they just like open up their restaurant and have Mahjong sets, and people can just come in and play with their friends or play with strangers for a game of Mahjong. And I went there, it was because I was imagining a completely different demographic. I thought it would be just like, Asian folks play Mahjong, but then there's a lot of like white people there too, and some of them are playing for the first time, and then there's like some volunteer instructor there who's just go there every week to teach people how to play, and that was just such a cute get-together on a slow Monday evening for a restaurant, and I'm just feel really excited and hopeful that people are trying all these kind of new ways of utilizing their space, and I think that's something that I'm really looking forward to, like how people will keep doing that.
Yeah, what I really love is, the community. Like, I think that despite the losses that we've talked about, I still, when I go into a neighborhood and I do a story, I still discover very strong community ties and people informing each other about what's going on, right? And business owners having this little network and talking to each other. And I think those are those really fragile networks that get interrupted when a business leaves, right? And I think when we just think about, I'm thinking about a couple of stories I did recently about new investment coming into a neighborhood. And I think we can all agree that San Francisco needs investment, right? We need certain things in certain areas to move into the future, right? And to set us up for success. But with that investment, you have to be careful to honor what's there and to support what's there and to kind of have an eye for what came before. And make sure that that's not completely erased, right? And I don't know, just riffing now.
We have time for one more question, so if I can move it on. Yeah, I see.
Hi, my name is Molly Martel. I'm a local business owner off of Divisadero. I have both an ask as well as a question. Daytime neighborhoods San Francisco's are thriving. The neighborhoods, please tell that story. Yes, daytime neighborhoods are thriving because of people working at home. Please tell that story versus the national story of San Francisco as a zombie land. The other one I have is that I have, upon occasion, tried to notify different divisions within the San Francisco city and government about inconsistencies in policy and have gotten a lot of radio silence or no, or I'm just going to ignore the fact that we're inconsistent. That effort is costly to small business owners, and I don't know if you have any stories that have really helped to show that the inconsistencies within departments at the city and county do cost small businesses a fair amount of time and effort.
You're talking about communication-wise?
Communication-wise are just things that are counter. Like one person says this and another person says another, and you're like, these are counter. Some of them are counter to public health, some of them are counter to safety, and some of them do require significant investment. If you've had successful stories there, I think that's an area that people really do want to hear about.
That actually is at the heart of the butter and crumble story, where the business owner was told one thing, not even between departments, within a department, was told different things on different days by different people.
Yeah. I think just to kind of take a step back, I hear those stories all the time. And I think city government has kind of a reputation for being reactive rather than proactive, right? You kind of react to what's happening versus seeing what's going to happen and setting yourself up for that. And I think that is just a function of, there are so many fights to fight in the city. And I've learned that through my reporting that, this might be my priority or a priority for the people that I report on, which is largely the business community. But there's also other communities that need certain things, right? And it's a constant battle of time and resources and attention. And I mean, we feel that as reporters even, I think I can say that. And you probably feel that in your daily lives as well. And the city, that's kind of what's happening in the city as well. Not excusing the lack of communication, because that can actually cost a business its life, right? Or a livelihood or whatever. So that does happen. And I hope that we were talking about the new mayor earlier and kind of the approach to business. And I think if you, focus on something and make it a priority, it's going to improve. So I think that's kind of the point that we're at, and we'll see how things change and if they change.
All right, on that note, let's give a round of applause to our wonderful panel. Thank you, each and every one of you, for bringing your perspective. Really invaluable. Love this moment. Thank you all for coming. We have surveys in the back. If you wouldn't mind grabbing one, there's a QR code, or you could just take it online. And happy Small Business Week, everybody.